For learning circuit 7, we're going to cover quantity and direction of light. So I want you to understand how you can use these different methods for the quantity of light and the direction of light to create pictures that have a little bit more expressive qualities. So we're going to talk about how you can do different portrait lighting techniques, but also how we can illuminate objects with the different types of light directions to affect how the photo looks. So to start with, we'll talk about the quantity of light. Quantity of light in any situation, whether it be artificial or natural, refers to the light intensity, or the amount of light. In this picture example, you can see the quantity of light is very high. The reason that we know is that it's so bright in that background, and with the direction that the light was coming from to expose to make the people show up, it had to be blowing out the background with the amount of brightness. There's limitations to what you can do with the camera unless you're bringing in your own light sources to expose for different parts of the picture if it's super bright out. So in this example, it was right around midday, so it's a sunny day as well, and it's very bright. So that's a very high quantity of light. Sometimes your biggest factor in what settings you can use is based on the quantity of light. If you have a lot of light available to you, you can do certain things. And if you don't have a lot of light available to you, like at nighttime, you wouldn't be able to do certain things. So for example, if we wanted to take this picture, and this was a very bright sunny day, we may not be able to have a slow shutter speed, because if we have too much brightness coming in, there's limitations to how much light we can take away with our other settings to make that happen. The same with going with a short depth of field. If you wanted to be able to have that really short depth of field, you may have limitations on how much light you can take away with your other settings. Not that you generally want to have a high ISO, really ever, because that's the quality of your picture going down. But if you had a really high ISO in this situation, where it's a bright sunny day, your picture would probably be too overexposed. Some of these are pretty straightforward, but how can you change the quantity of light? With artificial light, you can simply turn it on or off. You can move locations, so even if you're in a situation where there's a light in a room, if you move further away from the light, you're going to make the quantity less. Or you can even add your own light in, like the flash on the camera. So think about how, if we're doing something like light painting, how you have to have the room be dark. So we'd be turning those lights off so the quantity of light is 0 in the room, and we're only using our own lights within that situation. Natural light, the biggest thing you can do is just choose the time of day that you go out to take your pictures. Look at a weather report to see when that sunrise and sunset will be, and you can know what your limitations are for the quantity of light between those times. Another thing you can do is just move between shade and non-shaded areas when you're in that situation. For the direction of light, we're talking about where your light source is and the direction that you have the camera compared to your subject. For example, in this image here, our light is coming from the right-hand side of the frame, and our camera is facing towards our subject at an angle. So we know that this is side light going on because of the shadows that we're seeing. And it changes what we can do with how the picture looks. Here are two picture examples of front light. So the light is coming from the same direction as the camera. So for pictures like this, you tend to have a more even illumination of your subjects. So you can see the light appearing the same on both sides of the subject, and there aren't going to be that many complicated shadows. Sometimes front lighting isn't going to be as dramatic because your photos look a little bit more flat. Side light is having your camera facing towards your subject and your light at a 90-degree angle towards your subject on one side or the other. So with side light, you're going to have a little bit more complexity show up in your picture. For example, this image taken with side light using the sun, You can see the sides of the building a little bit differently because one side is darker and one side is brighter. It shows how three-dimensional that building can look. You can see texture a little bit more when you're doing side light as well. This can be great for portraits. If you're doing a real dramatic pose like this, a low-key light with the side light being used. But you can also just have side light with soft light even, where you just have it brighter on one side than the other. Backlight is where you have the light coming from behind your subject towards the camera. If you include that subject in the picture, you may have some lens flare going on, which sometimes can be an interesting thing. If you don't have that light source showing up in the image, you're just going to be seeing the shadows in a different way. This is how you'd actually be creating a silhouette. So silhouettes are where you expose for the background, so you make the background show up well, and your subjects will then turn dark, almost completely black if it's really bright behind. Here are two different lighting techniques that I want you to know. One of them is called high key. So with high key, the way that you set it up is you're going to have a white or a light colored background behind your subject, and you're going to be using a bright soft light, so your quantity should be pretty high on that. You're almost going to be overexposing your picture because you want to have the white behind really be bright so you don't see any details behind it. This can be a way to create a real upbeat photo that is sometimes used in product photography and makeup photography. Low key is the opposite. So you're going to be having a darker black background, and you're going to be using directed hard light, and you're going to make sure that light doesn't hit the background because you want the background to disappear. So using hard light is the best way to do this because it won't fall into the background as easily that way. So here's two picture examples for that. Side light can be real interesting. That's being used in both of these. You can look at these and determine which one is high key and low key. High key's over here, low key's over here. High key, low key. So let's talk about studio lighting a little bit. So if you get a chance to work with some studio lights, and in Photo 2 we generally do this, where we're working with studio lights and we're adjusting where they are and having those bright studio flashes go off to illuminate people and subjects. It's important that you understand the basic lights that you'd be using. So there's actually three of them. Key light is one, and that's the main light source that you're using. And you're going to be using that one first to figure out what basic scheme you're going to be using for the lighting, whether it be side, front, or back. Fill light is a light that's being used from the other angle from where the key light is. You want to bring in a little bit of light from that angle so that way you have something showing up in the shadow areas. Again, this is just the basic setup for 3 studio lights. Rim or hair light is being used to create a little edge on the shadow side of your subject. It may be coming from behind slightly, just so that way you have that rim illuminated. If you put them together, you're going to have a pretty dramatic looking still life. And you can even do this for portraits as well. So here's using the key and the fill, and here's adding that rim light in as well. So having all 3 of those light sources being used at the same time. Usually what I'll do is draw in an example of where you'd be putting the lights to create these 3 lighting schemes. So let's talk about some specific portrait lighting methods. And these we'd get to in class using the studio lights. Our first one is called loop. Loop is having the light off to one side or the other, but we're letting some of that light cast on to the shadowed side of the face. It's a real soft light, so you're going to notice a real blurred edge to our shadows. Whenever you're looking at a portrait using studio lights, you can look into the eye of the person and see where the lights are coming from to be able to know what type of light source is being used. So in this case, it's a softbox. We can see a little square light source in there. The next one's called the paramount or butterfly lighting. With this one, we're going to have the light come from the top down towards the subject. Again, looking at the reflection in the eyes, you can see it's right above the subject on down. And we're looking to see that that shadow comes straight down underneath their nose and chin. Normally you'd use a soft light for this, but it doesn't have to be. Split lighting is a side light on our subject. And your goal is to try to make it so you have a split part of the face, where it's completely dark on one side and totally bright on the other side. Normally you'd want to use a hard light source for this, because then the light won't bounce around onto the other side of the face or wrap around with a shadow edge transfer. Our next one is called Rembrandt Lighting. With this one, we're switching to a hard light source for sure, and we're going to have the light come from an angle towards our subject, so that way we can have a little bit of light come onto the shadowed side of the face, but that light that does travel across is in a small triangle underneath the eye on the opposite side. It's a very dramatic lighting scheme, but it's one that you'll notice quite a lot if you see a lot of portraits.